Health QR codes are back in China amid the mysterious disease, which is now already spreading around the world, including in Europe, the US, and Canada. Meanwhile, China is silent. However, the Chinese CDC did indirectly hint at how severe it is in the situation around China. And children in China are getting AIDS suddenly. What's been happening? Let me tell you. Meanwhile, many stores in China are regulating sugar buying. This means you have to take your government ID and your real name when you're buying it. Why? Because apparently Hamas used it to make explosives, and now people in China, the government's afraid. Welcome to China Insider, I'm David Zhang. Today we're going to cover two topics. The first is around the mysterious virus, and then we're going to talk about why sugar is being regulated in China. By now, many US media and overseas governments are catching up on because their country has been infected by this new mysterious pneumonia/disease. In many cases, it has caused kids to develop what's called white lungs, which is a severe type of respiratory condition. Because the mysterious virus has been downplayed by the CCP, people in China and around the world still have no idea what they're dealing with. But it is much worse than what the officials in Beijing are claiming. So far, the latest and the biggest indicator that the situation's getting bad is the return of the health QR code, which was made popular in China during the COVID pandemic. Some people say that it never left, even after last year when they stopped with the whole lockdown and zero COVID situation. But others say that this program has been restarted, particularly in a few provinces already. Now, if you don't know what a health QR code is, it's basically a QR code that turns different colors. Green, you're allowed to take transportation, dine at different restaurants, visit coffee shops, and go out in public, engaging in most public activities. If you have a yellow code, it means that you're restricted from certain things like public transportation or public spaces, and if you have red, you can't even leave your homes. Now, many places, including in the province of Guangzhou and Sichuan, they've restarted their provincial program, which in many cases, for example, like Shanghai, it had already turned into their social surveillance apparatus or being incorporated into a part of it. Meanwhile, a tweet from China's Weibo platform by Chairman He Xiaoping of the Xpeng Motors says that after he returned to China via Shanghai's port of entry, he was asked to do nose swabs for the nucleic acid test, which means that some parts, they're already restarting the COVID swab nose swabs again. Looks like we're back in business, boys and girls. Back right to draconian COVID lockdowns. Now, yesterday, 5 US senators had sent a letter to Biden to stop travel to China and from China because of this new outbreak, but we still have no official confirmation which exact disease is the cause. But this is already appearing in dozen US states and around the world. Now, today, another sign of that shows the severity is that officials from the Chinese CDC had come out saying that people, especially older adults, seniors, and kids should stop gathering in public spaces if not necessary, because this, again, to prevent the spread of infections. While they are not telling us what exactly is going on, this alone tells us it's severe enough that they don't want people to gather. What is interesting to point out, and fair point to describe to you guys, is that mortality so far has been quite low. There hasn't been enough reports, at least not in China, saying that massive amounts of people are dying from. But it is infecting first children, but now moving to a general, broader sense of the different age groups in the population. Otherwise, I think if we were already seeing high mortality, this would have been a big issue, even in China, and we would have gotten more information. But so far, that's the only thing that seems to be holding things down. A few days back, there were also information suggesting that at least in Beijing, they're restarting the quarantine camp program to compensate for the overwhelmed pediatric respiratory wards as well as other parts of hospitals in the city. Keep in mind, Beijing is supposed to be the most cutting edge in terms of medical access, medical services in all of China. For this to happen, it's a good indication that something has gone bad. Like I said, this initially affected mostly children. Schools were suspended. We've now seen more information suggesting that college students are also getting affected, older adults, families as well. So from what initially moved to be the first cases among children. Now, the official government says it is a mycoplasmic pneumonia, which is caused by a bacterial-like organism. But for some things to spread so fast, especially jumping between different age groups, you would require something like a virus or something else. And that's why in China right now, there's actually about 7, not 5, but 7 different diseases spreading around. Some are respiratory flus, you have syncytial viruses, you also have different sorts of seasonal influenzas, and all of these things are jumbled together and mixed among the population. And of course, there's COVID-19 as well. China did provide a little bit of data to the WHO when they requested it for the public records. However, in that record request and the information they submitted, there was no documentation for a widespread case of COVID-19. But they did say that there's 7 viruses being spread in China. And here's the interesting part. They still maintain that mycoplasma pneumonia is the main cause, which in many cases are being repeated by Western media. And I think that's a mistake to assume what China is telling us is the 100% truth. Now, according to the top science journal Nature, they've been questioning whether plasma or mycoplasma pneumonia is really the cause, as in those cases it's quite easy to treat with different medicines. But when it comes to another mysterious disease outside of the potential cause that is mycoplasma pneumonia, then it becomes quite difficult because you'd have to know exactly what we're dealing with. And that's why the Nature Journal article says it is unusual because this has targeted children and it also has caused severe respiratory conditions such as the white lung. And what else is interesting is that in the cases overseas being reported, many of them are related to virus or viral diseases, whereas back in China it's being painted as a picture of bacterial infection. Now, bacterial infection, of course, draws the potential of what's objectively happening in Asia, which is a high antibiotic resistance, whereas in the West, treating mycoplasma pneumonia becomes quite easy because there's a relatively lower resistance to antibiotics. And another problem that seems to not be talked about a lot is vaccine. Before we talk about it, let me introduce you to Shenyun Performing Arts 2024 tour, which is starting around the corner at the end of December. Now, Shenyun Performing Arts comes from New York, and it is a classical Chinese dance performance where you'll be taken through the journey of traveling through the history of China, through its 5,000 years of rich culture, history, and all the wonderful experiences through dancing and music. Shenyun also features all new programs, new costumes, and new music scores every single year for their production. And they even have a live orchestra which performs with both the Western ensemble for string instruments and the Chinese instruments. So the musical experience is also extremely, extremely unique. Starting on December 26th, Shenyun will be performing in 3 locations in the United States alone, including Boston, including Fort Lauderdale, and Houston in Texas. Now, if you're not living in those 3 areas, don't worry, there's actually more shows coming right up after. Shenyun will be touring around the world, including in Asia, in Europe, as well as the rest of America, Canada. So be sure to go to shenyun.com/tickets to find the closest city and the date to you, and so that you can purchase tickets quickly. And I'm still debating whether I want to watch it in Houston, Texas, or in Fort Lauderdale in Florida. So let me know in the comments which one I should go to. Click the link in the description and it'll take you directly to Shenyun's ticketing page, and you can find all the locations for this year's tour. All right, let's return to the video. Now, to talk about vaccination is obviously quite sensitive of a topic to YouTube, but I want to keep it brief. Now, the objective facts is that in China, at a very young age, they have multiple rounds of vaccinations. And unfortunately, in some cases, these vaccines do have a lot of problems with them, especially given the fact that the latest rounds against COVID and otherwise, they have not gone through an extensive long-term, in terms of the effects, what permanent damages it could cause or short-term damage it could cause. And so these things were never incorporated into the process before it was introduced to the public, at least in China. And it's also an objective fact that Chinese vaccines have a lower efficacy compared to its Western counterparts. And that alone creates a situation where if your body has a lot of vaccine dependency, which again adds and contributes to the lack of immunity, that part alone can create the situation where now you have multiple viruses/diseases, even bacteria, that could invade your body and destroy your immunity. Combined with what I just said about the antibiotic situation, the high resistance to antibiotics in China, you have almost a perfect condition to harbor and for different sorts of diseases to happen. Along with this, there's also news about Chinese kids are now becoming infected with AIDS. Of course, we know that AIDS virus can be transmitted either through sexual activities or through some sort of potentially, again, I'm not going to say too much about it in case YouTube takes this video down, but you know what? And so we were seeing pictures of, in Zhejiang province at least, a center now put up for children or pediatric tuberculosis, as well as for HIV, of course, virus task force. And so people were wondering online, why are they putting up pediatric HIV or AIDS center for kids? Is there a massive outbreak somehow happening? So that's a piece of information to keep in mind as well. Something really interesting and very sad actually is happening in China. All right, now let's talk about the second part of the video, which is why China is regulating sugar purchases. Now, according to screenshots and photos online of people discussing this issue, and this is quite interesting because in China you have different things that's regulated, right? People need to have their government-issued ID when buying a cleaver. They need to be documented and recorded for the purpose of tracking them later on. For buying fruit knives in Xinjiang, you also need to have your real name and identity. For buying things like I believe, different sorts of phone numbers, credit cards to go online, you also need your real name as well. And I also think buying cooking canisters in China, the cooking gas that you use, still needs your real identity as well. But the question is, why sugar? Now, some of them say that this is because after Hamas had used sugar as part of creating makeshift explosives, that the government in China is so afraid that its own citizens will use it. That's why they're regulating sugar. But this has happened as early as 2020, being reported that some stores in China have put up this warning sign saying that if you want to buy sugar, you have to show us your ID. And any sugar purchases over 5 kilograms in weight must also require registration and ID as well. Depending on who you ask for this, I think there are 3 reasons compiled online. The first reason is, like I said, this explosive matter, right? If you combine it with potassium nitrate, sugar, you can create makeshift explosives. And so if obviously China wants to track who has been purchasing sugars in large quantities, and that's why they're trying to get the real ID with government authentic records and authentication going so that they know who's buying them. The second reason people give is that sugar means sugar-coated bullet. Now, you might be thinking, what does Chinese people have to do with guns and bullets? If they can't even own guns, why would they buy bullets? So where does sugar-coating bullet comes from? Well, it's actually not a real bullet. It's a strategy described by Mao Zedong called sugar-coated bullet. The idea is that because countries like imperialist America or imperial Japan, they want to invade and they want to cause trouble against China, right? This propaganda purpose. They're saying that it may seem like they're trying to do a good intention on the surface, but that's the sugar-coated part, because the bullet after that is what's going to destroy you. So it's a warning. Now, this being applied to the current context and the political situation in China, it's basically saying that, there's a radical political direction change in China, and the sugar-coated bullet is anything can be seen as sensitive, politically sensitive to the current regime, and you better not do anything radical, like buying sugar. And the third reason is even more interesting. They're saying that sugar can cause diabetes, and so if you're buying sugar, you need to register with the store so that they can inform the health officials, and then health officials can inform you if you happen to develop diabetes. Now, I don't know anybody that's buying raw sugar or sugar in a bag and going home and just consuming them as if they're trying to catch type 2 diabetes. But I do know that this is the most ridiculous answer you can give for somebody who wants to buy sugar and is asking why they're being controlled and have to give their real name for buying sugar. If you walked into the supermarket in New York City or somewhere in the United States or in Canada, and the cashier or the clerk says, to buy this bag of sugar, you need to show me your ID, you think people are crazy, right? This is not a rifle, or this is not a handgun, this is a bag of sugar. And so some people were saying that, well, if you're going to regulate sugar, why don't you also regulate flour? Flour, under a certain condition, when you combine it with different things, can also be used to make explosives. So should people just stop eating? I mean, anything technically can be used to make a weapon. Why is the government so afraid? And that's what people are questioning. Which is interesting if you can think about this, right? The idea of the government owns a gun. Chinese people can't own guns, but the government has guns. But if you have a cleaver, they deemed you as a dangerous individual. I didn't know what this term meant until the other day when I was talking about the whole live streaming situation, right? This is called Streisand effect, which is basically that you try to hide so much information from the public, but it backfires. And then in the end, people gained increasing knowledge of the topic because, well, you basically try to hide it, but more people became aware of this. So they're saying that, you banning this regular sugar buying is like teaching the public about physical and chemical lessons, which they can then use to actually make explosives. The more things you ban, the more questions people have. All right, that's it today for the episode on China Insider of how China's virus is in its latest information and update, as well as why China is regulating sugar buying, where you need to spend, or at least give them your record and your information so that they can track you. If you enjoy the content, leave a like, comment below your thoughts, and subscribe to our channel today. All right, until next time, bye-bye.